The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as a mysterious woman stood up and declared, "He knows everything." Judge Carter's hands trembled as Eleanor smiled and said, "The truth can't be hidden anymore." Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The courtroom was a stage, and every player knew their role. The air buzzed with anticipation, thick enough to cut with a knife. Spectators leaned forward, their whispers weaving a tapestry of curiosity and judgment. At the center of it all sat Judge William Carter, a man whose reputation for stern justice was as unshakable as the mahogany bench he presided over. But today, the script was about to be rewritten. The prosecutor, a sharp-witted woman with years of experience, stepped forward to deliver her closing argument. Her voice was steady, her words precise. She was about to strike the final blow in a case that had gripped the nation, a high-stakes embezzlement scandal involving powerful businessmen and millions of dollars. But just as she began to speak, a voice rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "He knows everything." The room froze. Every head turned, every breath held. The voice belonged to a woman standing at the back of the courtroom, her presence as commanding as her words. She was in her late 30s, dressed modestly yet elegantly, her piercing blue eyes locked onto Judge Carter. "Bailiff! Remove that woman at once!" Judge Carter's voice boomed, but beneath the authority was a tremor of something uncharacteristic, fear. The bailiff hesitated, glancing between the judge and the woman. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took a deliberate step forward, her gaze never wavering. "You know who I am, Judge Carter," she said, her voice calm but laced with an eerie certainty. "And you know why I'm here." The murmurs grew louder, the weight of her words sending an electric charge through the room. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Judge Carter's grip on the gavel trembled, his face pale as the walls of the courtroom seemed to close in around him. "Court is adjourned," he declared, slamming the gavel down with a force that echoed through the room. He stood abruptly, his robes billowing as he turned away from the bench. But the woman didn't leave. Instead, she smiled, a knowing smile that sent a chill down the spines of all who witnessed it. This was far from over. Judge William Carter sat alone in his dimly lit office, the heavy oak door locked behind him. The echo of those three words, "He knows everything," still reverberated in his mind. The woman's voice had carried something chilling, something familiar. But it couldn't be, could it? His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a crystal decanter, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey. The liquid burned as it slid down his throat, but it did little to calm his nerves. 15 years ago, a case had haunted him, a case buried deep but never forgotten. A young woman, Anna Whitmore, had dared to stand against one of the most powerful senators in the country. She had presented damning, irrefutable evidence. And yet, the case had disappeared. The witness had vanished. And those who tried to dig deeper had met grim fates. Judge Carter had been a different man then, a rising star in the judicial system, ambitious, hungry for influence. He hadn't asked questions. He had followed orders. But now, the past was clawing its way back. A sharp knock on his door made him jolt. He hesitated before unlocking it. His assistant, Claire, stood there, her usually composed face now pale and uneasy. "Sir, she's still here. She refuses to leave." Claire's voice wavered. "She says she has proof." Carter's heart pounded in his ears. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't sure he'd ever be. Still, he rose from his chair, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door, his breath shallow. As he stepped into the lobby, the woman was already waiting, standing near the large marble pillar. The second their eyes met, his stomach lurched. She smiled, not in a friendly way, but in a way that said she knew everything. That she had waited for this moment. "Judge Carter," she said smoothly, stepping forward. "It's been a long time." He found his voice, though it felt hoarse. "Who are you?" She leaned in ever so slightly. "You already know. And you know why I'm here." Carter inhaled sharply, his grip tightening into a fist. His past had finally come knocking, and it wasn't going away quietly. Judge Carter barely slept that night. The weight of Eleanor Shaw's words pressed down on him like an iron chain, dragging him into a past he had fought so hard to bury. He spent hours going through old case files, scanning pages that once meant nothing but now carried a sinister significance. By morning, he was exhausted, but he had made a decision: he had to hear her out. The courtroom was eerily empty when he arrived. It wasn't an official session, it was a closed-door meeting, a desperate attempt to keep the floodgates from bursting open. Eleanor Shaw sat on the witness stand, an air of quiet confidence surrounding her. "Let's get one thing straight," Carter said, his voice hoarse. "If you have proof, show it. Otherwise, this ends now." Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila folder, dropping it onto the desk between them. Carter hesitated before opening it. The first page alone made his breath hitch, a signed statement from a former court clerk detailing manipulated evidence, forced confessions, and bribed jurors. "These are sealed documents," he muttered. "How did you get these? Does it matter?" Eleanor countered. "What matters is that you were involved, Judge Carter. Maybe not directly, maybe not intentionally, but you played your part. And now you have to decide what to do about it." His fingers tightened around the edges of the folder. "If I open this case, you know what happens next." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Yes. And so do they. Which is why you don't have much time." A loud knock on the chamber door made them both jolt. Carter's pulse quickened. It wasn't supposed to be common knowledge that they were meeting. "Sir, you have a visitor," his assistant's voice came through the door, tinged with something Carter couldn't quite place: fear. "It's urgent." Carter exchanged a glance with Eleanor. They both knew someone else had found out. As he stood to open the door, a sinking feeling settled in his gut. The hidden truth was no longer hidden. And someone was willing to do anything to keep it that way. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. The walls, which had witnessed years of carefully orchestrated trials, now stood as silent spectators to a moment that could shake the foundation of the judicial system. Judge William Carter sat at his bench, his hands gripping the gavel tightly. The evidence Eleanor Shaw had presented over the past days had left no room for doubt. The corruption ran deep, far deeper than anyone had imagined. Eleanor sat at the witness stand, her posture unyielding. Her eyes, sharp and determined, met Carter's gaze. "You know what must be done," she said, her voice unwavering. "The truth must come out." A murmur spread through the gallery, a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and the entire city held its breath. The defense attorney, sweating under the weight of irrefutable proof, rose to his feet. "Your Honor, my client." Carter raised his hand, silencing him. He turned his gaze toward the accused, a man who once walked these halls with unchecked power, now reduced to a mere defendant. Taking a deep breath, Carter finally spoke. "This court finds sufficient grounds to launch an independent investigation into judicial misconduct. Effective immediately, all cases linked to the presented evidence will be reopened." Gasps filled the room. Some in shock, others in triumph. The powerful men who once controlled the system exchanged glances, realizing that their empire of deceit was crumbling before their eyes. Eleanor exhaled, her mission accomplished. But she knew this was only the beginning. The war against corruption wasn't over, it had only just begun. As she stepped outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, eager for a statement. She simply smiled and said, "He knows everything. And now, so does the world." The truth had been set free, and with it, the promise of justice. But in the shadows, the battle was far from finished.